Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Diane and Tanvi. And I guess people who have not signed in will probably watch the recording. Welcome, everyone, for our monthly psychological skills building webinar. Last month, we talked about mindfulness and self-compassion skills. This is a very good foundation skill to have and then build other. And please watch that recording if you have not. And both Tanvi and Diane have. Today, Lisa will help us dive in more in understanding emotions. To recap why we wanted to take more reactive approach in addressing psychological well-being is about a year ago when I attended a conference regarding 40% of the unexplained chronic medical illnesses that we see in our day-to-day practice. We learned a lot of new information coming out from the neuroscience research and advances. It showed that physical injury, emotional injury, real injury, and even imagined injury, they all triggering the same pain centers in the brain. Now, physical injury heals over a period of time, and it'll stop triggering the pain centers. Few days for a sprain, or few months for a fracture, or even up to 4 to 6 months for really bad tissue injury, and then it stops to trigger the alarm or the pain centers in the brain. Emotional injury or hurt, on other hand, can persist or be ongoing and also stored in our memory database, and hence continue to trigger the pain alarm centers in our brain. It is explained that our brain uses input from three areas: from our environment, and from within us, and from our database to produce an experience for us. And unfortunately, when these inputs from these three areas, main areas, are unfavorable or not favorable, that can result in brain producing an unfavorable experience for us. Stressors from the environment, stressors from within, and the memory of stressors from past experiences. This can lead the brain to produce an unfavorable experience like a chronic migraine, chronic jaw pain, chronic diarrhea, fatigue, anxiety, panic attacks, etc. Now, these experiences will naturally trigger additional set of negative emotions like fear, worry, anxiety, frustration, etc., that can circle in and continue to trigger those alarm and pain centers in our brain, leading to a vicious negative cycle of being unwell. So here we are in our journey to build psychological skills to better process our emotions so that we can help us shift to a rather positive cycle of well-being. And so I would like to hand over to Lisa to take over the presentation. And Lisa is a psychotherapist and she's a mindfulness teacher. And she's taught over for about 20 years teaching mindfulness and coping skills. And she also trains many other therapists to use holistic mind-body therapies. She's trained in mindfulness, internal family systems, dialectical behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization therapy, emotionally focused therapy, and many other skills that Lisa comes with. And she's here today to help us understand emotions further. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I just want to welcome everybody, and I want to encourage everyone to just put on the shelf for a while all the things that have happened earlier today, all the things you might be worried about doing tonight or tomorrow, and let's just try to arrive fully in the present moment. And I want to encourage you, I'm going to give you a lot of information today, but as Dr. Sharma reiterated, you will have access. She will email you, they will email you a video recording of this talk so you can watch it again. And you should have also received a handout. The handout is not the slide presentation, it's just a slight recap of some of the skills, not all of them. So if something really you're curious about, you don't feel like you understand correctly, you can just make a little note. We'll have a question and answer period at the end. And again, you can refer to the handouts after the talk and get the recording of the talk as well. So let's maybe all just take a big deep breath and let it go and let go of anything that we're carrying that keeps us from being present. And again, my name is Lisa Cottrell. My practice is well-being psychotherapy. I've got to do this. Okay. And we're talking about understanding emotions and how clarity helps. So, we're going to start with what are we going to talk about today? This talk is going to help you understand why we have emotions, how our thoughts impact our emotions, the difference between emotions, thoughts, interpretations, and evaluations, and why that matters, and a few tools to help you cope better with your emotions. Although there's a whole nother class, and there's actually like some of the emotion regulation and distress tolerance classes are like 12-week classes. You don't have to take that whole amount to learn that, but that's if you want to learn and practice some of those skills you can get in groups that can teach you that or lectures. Okay, so to start off, before texting, we had to write letters by hand, and before emojis, we honestly just bottled up our emotions. Now, maybe you can relate to that, as many of us have been raised in a way that's kind of emotionally invalidating, like you're too sensitive or you shouldn't be feeling the way you feel, and things of that nature. But there are psychological truths, like our emotions are natural and necessary. What you resist persists. So, part of what Dr. Sharma was talking about, if we keep trying to push down our emotions, they don't go away. They stay around longer than if we just had them and then let them go or addressed any irrational thoughts that may be causing them. And then there's also the truism that you have to feel it to heal it. This is especially true about neglect and trauma. You know, you need to have the feelings so you can get past them. And again, most of us have not been taught to effectively deal with our emotions, but therapists have developed a lot of tools and skills to help you with just that. So, why do humans have emotions? Well, many people view emotions as problems and think they'd really rather not have them, especially if they're negative. And in fact, you know, that's really not correct because there have been people that have had certain types of severe and unusual traumatic brain injuries who can't feel emotions. And so scientists have learned a lot from those people because, like, for example, there was this one man, there's been a number of cases that have been studied, but there was this one man and he couldn't feel emotions. So he couldn't make any decisions because we need our emotions to motivate us, tell us if one thing's better than the other, and to help us make decisions. Like he would know I should get my wife a birthday card because he rationally remembers that, but he couldn't decide between the hundreds of cards. He didn't even want to eat because there was no motivation. So we need emotions to motivate us. But also, emotions evolve to help us survive by helping us prepare to act quickly. We get a surge of hormones and chemicals so that we can respond to threats, for example. Imagine if we didn't have fear. We might approach dangerous animals. We may not be cautious about heights and other dangers. We may not gather in groups for safety and support. I got to move my bar because I can't read it. And we may not defend ourselves and our loved ones. So that would be pretty bad, right? So sometimes we think, I don't want to be afraid. Well, no, we just want our fear to be appropriate, right sized, right? We want it to fit the facts of the current situation. So, you've heard, I'm sure, about the fear response, and there's 4 different ways that people can respond to fear. When you're scared, you might fight and try to overpower the threat. You might flee and run away to escape it. You might fawn, which means you go to others in group, sort of like, wildebeests gathering together to in a huddle, or running together to avoid prey, staying together in a group for help and comfort. You might freeze like plain dead and be unable to move. That's usually when a predator is right on us and we like are so terrified and we think I'm going to die. It's sort of like plain dead. But in fact, we can have freeze like responses where we just space out and dissociate when we're threatened. That's not when we're in mortal danger. So um, sometimes we don't understand why we can't speak or move, and it could be that we have an overactive freeze response, often because of some kind of prior trauma. But in general, these responses make it more likely for you to survive and have offspring, which is why they're evolutionarily beneficial. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about emotions, so I'm going to try to clear some of that up. But scientists have researched there are a few basic emotions that all humans across cultures recognize. There's some argument whether there's 6 or 7 or 8, but for sure these 6, everybody, like if you take a picture of a person, that person, unless they have an emotional, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it's where people have trouble identifying emotions. They can identify, oh, that's happiness, that's sadness, that's fear, that's disgust, that's anger, that's surprise. Some people say the contempt and shame might be basic, but there needs to be a little more research on that. But these are ones that are common to all human. Now, I want to go back to say there are cultural variations in how you express emotions. The stereotypes about, like Italians being very expressive and other people like the Brits being very reserved, based on some truth, some cultural differences, right? But they all still have these emotions. Now, again, emotions urge us to act and prompt and prepare us to act. So, what does fear urge us to do? It urges us to flee or freeze. Anger urges us to fight. Surprise urges us to stop and reorient ourselves, like what's going on here. Shame urges us to hide our behavior to avoid being outcast. So this one's really interesting because remember, most of these we're really adapted to hunter-gatherer phase of our life, okay? So if you think back to when we were surviving in the wilderness, if you did something that was really against social norms, they would just kick you out of the tribe and you had a high chance of starving to death and not making it. So, shame as a mechanism for social control has always been really powerful because there's also this fear that it's going to threaten our very survival. Sadness or grief urges us to rest, and disgust, among other things, urges us to avoid bad food and to avoid contamination. And we can overgeneralize that to judging and having disgust over certain groups of people. But the main evolutionary benefit is like, that smells terrible, don't eat it, that sort of thing. Okay. So these are the primary biological urges of what emotions try to get us to do. Happiness or pleasure urges us to do it again. That berry was delicious. Let's have another one, right? Um, I'm in love with this person. Let's see them more, right? But there's also complex emotions that are like, you combine the basic emotions, and these are learned and they vary by culture and they require thought and interpretation. So, most of our emotions are complex. For example, hate is a fusion of anger, fear, and disgust. Love blends tenderness, pleasure, devotion, and passion. Embarrassment, shame, guilt, and pride are complex emotions that require us to evaluate and judge ourselves. Okay? So, you've all, of course, seen emojis, which can be very helpful for people to get clear about what they're feeling, especially young kids. Um, but I want to talk about what triggers emotions. And thoughts and interpretations play an important part. It's not just what happens to you that causes an emotion, it's also how you interpret what happens and how you think. So, for example, let's say your loved one makes you mad. They say something and you get mad, but they didn't just make you mad. You had to have a series of thoughts and interpretations really quickly that led you to get mad about it, right? And then your interpretations are impacted by your past history and your current mood. We all know that there's certain times where we haven't slept well, we're sick, we're going to be more emotional. Your mood is impacted by your overall well being, which is impacted by your history. Like, do you have chronic illnesses? Were you raised in an abusive environment? Your environment, your attitude, and your self care are all important. And the reason I say this is each one of these points is a place where you can work on improving your emotions and your mood. And you can change how you view things, your attitude, and your self care. You can also change some aspects of your environment, such as your job or your friends or other things that might make you happier, for example. Now, again, I'm giving you a lot of emotion, a lot of information, but you will be able to review this tape later if you need to. So, one thing that a lot of people have a misunderstanding about is that emotions are internal. They're in response to something that happens, such as an event or a thought. They create an internal chemical hormonal response and bodily sensations. So sometimes when people aren't sure what they feel, you can say, well, notice your body. Are you feeling like tense in your shoulders and your jaw and your fists? And do you feel kind of hot up here? It's a good chance you're kind of angry, right? Do you feel jittery all over? Maybe you're kind of scared or anxious, right? Because again, things happen. We interpret whether we feel safe, whether we feel a threat, whether we feel desire, and the body creates a chemical response that we feel in our body so that we know and we get ready to act. So, again, emotions motivate us and prepare us to act. They prepare us to flee, fight, freeze, connect, pursue, rest, hide, etc. Now, emotions also communicate to other people, often non-verbally. Like if you saw somebody looking really scared and running out of a restaurant, you'd probably think, oh my gosh, what's going on in there? I better run. Something must be dangerous, right? So they don't have to say anything. You could be like, wow, they're terrified. What's going on? So it's the facial expressions, the body expressions, and of course, we communicate our emotions verbally too, by our words, by our tone of voice. Um, Now, emotions also don't always fit the facts, meaning they're not always rational. They're not always in accordance with reality. So, for example, if you feel scared, it doesn't necessarily mean you're in danger. Let's say you have a phobia of getting on an elevator. Elevators are, in fact, really safe now. They no longer plummet, they have safety devices, right? But you could still be irrationally afraid of an elevator. But it would be better for you to feel the fear and get on the elevator and realize over time that you're safe and you continue to be safe than like some people I've known that walk up 20 flights and down 20 flights every day because they're scared of an elevator, right? So in that case, the fear doesn't fit the facts. If you feel confident, it doesn't necessarily mean you are right or competent. And emotions are not thoughts. A lot of times I'll ask clients, how are you feeling? And they'll say, I feel like blah, blah, blah. That's a thought. Like, I feel like maybe blah, 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 blah. That's a thought. They might say, I feel you are mean. That's a thought. That's an interpretation. So they're not emotional evaluations of what we believe others have done to us. So I'm going to explain that more because that's really important. And I will say at the end of this and in the handout I sent you, there's also a whole page on nonviolent communication that is sort of a cheat sheet I created that's really helpful for helping differentiate some of these things. So, emotions are not evaluations or beliefs about what we believe others have done to us. Okay? If the supposed emotion you feel includes blame or an evaluation of another person, it's not an emotion. Emotions happen inside of you, in your body and mind. So, for example, I feel betrayed is an evaluation, which is a type of thought because it includes the belief that somebody else has betrayed you, somebody else has done something to you. So, it's not saying, this is what I feel in my body. It's a belief, it's a thought. When you think you've been betrayed, what emotions do you feel? Probably sad or angry or disappointed or all of the above. Those you feel in your body, you notice in your body, but the thought betrayed is an evaluation or interpretation of what somebody else has done to you. The emotions come back usually to some of those more basic emotions. Other examples of things that you're saying other people have done to you, so therefore their evaluations, even though they're highly emotional words, are abandoned, disrespected, neglected, pressured. Now, I'm not saying those theories may not be true, but they're not emotions. Okay? You can have evaluations, but they're theories about others. They're not your emotions. Evaluations and interpretations influence the type of emotions you feel about events. Okay? So, um, take care of your emotions, they make you feel alive. If you leave this talk with nothing else, I want you to take this away. Be a friend to yourself. So, just like with mindful self compassion, we need to be kind to ourselves. And I like to use the analogy of be like a good mother or good father to your emotions instead of a bad mother. Okay? Most of us, a lot of us, have learned to be a bad mother to ourselves and our emotions. Now, what I mean by that is, let's think about a bad mother. Let's assume she's got this baby that's under 6 months old. He's crying in the other room. He or she's crying in the other room. And I want you to just think for a minute, what does a bad mother do? Okay. Probably the bad mother either ignores the baby and is like mad at the baby, or goes in and yells at the baby, right? Neglecting, yelling, shaming, and not wanting to deal with the baby. Sometimes the mother might be like, I'm just going to turn on music and really not listen to the baby, right? So, if we were to think about our emotions and we were to imagine holding the baby of our emotions in our arms and looking down at it, at this crying baby, and we were like, what's wrong, my little anger? What's wrong, my little fear? With this loving curiosity, then a good mother would be like, well, let me figure out what's wrong, right? It's either wet, hungry, tired, or maybe if the mother cannot figure out what's wrong, she at least stays with it and tries to give it some comfort, right? So if we look deeply, why am I scared? Why am I angry? What's going on? and bring kindness and compassion and figure out what's the emotion trying to tell me and how can I respond to it more effectively. And if the emotion is sort of like a slightly older child, you can just be with it if it's scared that there's monsters under their bed, and you can also show it there's no monsters under the bed, right? So you can be comforting and rational with your emotions. Okay. So, going back to the emotional urges to act that our emotions create in us, should we always act on those urges? Probably not. Our emotional urges are best suited for when we were hunter gatherers in the wild. When we're anxious or afraid, do we always need to run? No. Do we always need to get paralyzed in fear? No, not most of the time. Not in civilized society. If your boss comes in the room and you're scared of him because you think he's mad, you probably don't need to run screaming out of the room. That wouldn't be very helpful or effective, right? When we get angry, should we start swinging punches? Very rarely. Only if we're really, really in danger, threatened, right? If we're getting beat up, maybe so. Do we need to fight to protect our lives or those we love with physical violence? Very rarely. Most often, we're not in life threatening danger. In modern society, some of our action urges need to be tamed and toned down. Now, let's say you're out camping, you've got a small child, a wolf comes up or a coyote and starts running off with it. Should you get angry? Should you pick up a stick, run after it, chase it down, and beat on it to get your kid back? Yes, right? That would be appropriate. So we need to differentiate when we need to act on those urges and when we don't. Now, a side note, I used to work as a fundraiser for Men Stopping Violence Against Women, and they would work with men that were abusive to their partners. And, the group facilitators would say to a guy, now, why did you hit your wife? And he'd say, well, she made me mad, and act like he had no control. Well, that's not true. That's an excuse, even though he might have believed it. Because, if he was in public and there was a policeman standing right next to him, if she made him mad, he would not hit her, right? So we need to take responsibility that we can control our behavior. So before acting on an emotion, it would be wise to pause and think. So pausing skill or stop skills are very important. Would acting on this emotion be effective in getting me what I want and be in alignment with my goals and highest values? Sometimes we need to act opposite to the urge. So when we're angry, instead of screaming at or punching someone, we probably want to calmly walk away and avoid them for a little while until we calm down or be a little nice. Now, that doesn't mean that we might not want to come back later if they've really done something and say, that really made me hurt and angry. I wish you wouldn't do that. We can set boundaries with people, but usually when we're very emotional, it's not the time to do that because we're liable to, be a little too emotional and not be heard. So instead of running, screaming, or avoiding a situation when we're irrationally scared, we probably want to approach the situation like the elevator I was talking about. It's good to feel the fear and do it anyway. I work with a number of clients that are socially anxious. And if you keep avoiding the situations that make you scared, you're going to reinforce your anger and you're going to do less and less. So you need to feel the fear and do it anyway when you're not actually in danger. Now, pleasure can urge us to do more, but that can be problematic and lead to excess eating, drinking, sex, shopping, drugs, alcohol, and all of that. So sometimes we need to do less. So the skill is do the opposite of the urge when it's not wise to do what the urge wants you to do. One type of therapy I like a lot that I'm trained in is called dialectical behavioral therapy. And it talks about 3 states of mind. So we have reasonable mind, we have emotional mind, and we have wise mind. And you'll notice they overlap because the goal is not to not have any emotions, not to have any reason, but to listen to both, filter them through wise mind. So, wise mind is not only listening to both, but adding in intuition, wisdom, reality orientation, and then knowing what to do. So, I don't know how many of y'all have ever had like a still small voice in your head. I have one, and sometimes it just tells me really silly things, but they're nonetheless wise. Like, don't set that glass there, you're going to knock it off. And every single time I set the glass there anyway, I knock it off. Or you better watch out, you're going to forget and leave your keys in your car. And I'm not mindful and I leave them in the car. You know what I'm saying? Other times it's like, don't send that email, and I'll find out that I sent it anyway and it was full of errors, or I was being too emotional and I should have waited. So when you get those prompts like that, it's usually good to listen. Now, for those of you who are either old enough to have remembered old school Star Trek or like reruns, or maybe you've seen the new versions of Star Trek, Star Trek Spock is a really good example of reasonable mind because he's very rational, cool, analytical. He doesn't relate to emotions, so he can lack empathy. And these are all on the Starship Enterprise, which is in outer space doing exploration. Scotty is the captain, the engineer, and he is kind of emotional. But you'll notice it doesn't just say emotions, it says emotion mind because it's the thoughts that are charged with emotion. So the thoughts are emotional, they're hot, can be reactive. So, for example, Captain Kirk, he's my example of wise mind. Not that he's the most wise person on the universe, but he's pretty reasonable, pretty wise, pretty emotional. He synthesizes reason and emotion. I'm sorry, what? He synthesizes reason and emotion, adds intuition and wisdom. So he listens to both of his crew members and then acts based on his instinct. He also, like, let's say they're out there and they're trying to evade an enemy ship. And so he's like, Spock says we can do this. He tells the engineer to give it full speed ahead. Scotty might say, I can't go any faster, Captain. The ship is going to blow up. Well, that's important information. It's highly emotional because it's highly important. And Kirk listens to it and then does what's right. Okay. Um, there we go. Okay. So now I want to talk about, if I can get the slide to go back forward. Yeah, the ABCs of emotions. These are some concepts from cognitive behavioral therapy. So again, I've said this a few times, it's not just what happens, but it's how we interpret it and how we evaluate it and what we believe about it that leads to our emotions. So the activating event, which is what happens, our beliefs about the event, which can be distorted or inaccurate, and then the consequences are either a healthy or an unhealthy negative emotion, for example. And being rational helps us ensure our feelings fit the facts. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example. Observable fact. Observable fact means you could see it on video, you could hear it on video. Your boss comes into your office frowning. How might you interpret that fact? And how would you feel based on that event plus your thought? Okay. So I want you to think about how you might interpret that. Perhaps you thought your boss was angry at you. This may be rational if she's often blaming and criticizing you. Even then, it's possible she just had a fight with her spouse or has a headache. It may be irrational if they're usually complimentary to you. So I have some clients that, their parents were kind of very negative and abusive, and it's kind of their tendency to always think people are blaming them or upset with them. Um, but you could be curious or assume the best, or you could see if they tell you if they're upset with you. But you could be doing a cognitive distortion, which means a thought distortion. We all do them, but it's good to catch them. So, two, a person might be doing are jumping to conclusions and personalizing, which means thinking things are about you when they're not. We all tend to be a little self centered because we're the center of our universe, right? But a lot of times, you know, like I'll give you another example. Somebody walks into the office and this whole group of people in the break room are whispering together and they stop talking when the person walks in. And they could go off on this fantasy, this story about, oh, they don't like me and they're talking about me. And they get really upset. And then later, the next day, they find out they were planning a surprise birthday party for them, right? So we can jump to conclusions. Okay. It may be understandable if you tend to have a negative view if you grew up being criticized a lot, but your habitual assumption is not necessarily true now. And we need to remind ourselves of we're not helpless children anymore and things have changed in our life. So again, the consequences, how might you feel and what might you do if you believed your boss was angry at you? You might feel anxious, scared, frustrated, or angry. So we need to question our automatic assumptions or beliefs. If this belief was based on your tendency to take things too personally, you could become more rational, question your interpretation. Do I know it's true? Could there be another reason? Put things in perspective and feel better. So I want to just say right now, it's not in any of these slides, but 3 questions I have my clients ask themselves all the time about their thoughts is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it kind to yourself? Is it helpful to yourself? Is it true right now, or do you not actually know? Are you making up stuff about the future? Okay. So, again, I want to stress the difference between facts and interpretations. A fact is observable. You could see it and hear it on video, just the facts. So, I'm going to give you an example that's not on this slide first. Let's say you're driving down I-75. You see a car pulled over by the side of the road and a man slumped over the wheel. You might call 911 and say, I think this man had a heart attack. I think this man's drunk. I think this man's dead. Those are interpretations. They're not the facts. The facts are that this man is slumped against the wheel of his car, right? That's all you really know. So a fact is not an interpretation. Example, you come home and your son is lying on the couch and not doing his chores. Those are observable facts. An interpretation might be he's lazy. It might be true. However, sometimes interpretations are wrong or overgeneralized. What if you found out he'd already done his chores, even though that's not his usual habit? Or perhaps he is sometimes lazy, like about household chores, but works hard at sports and schoolwork. Does labeling him as lazy help your mood or help him? Maybe that's a bit of an overgeneralization, right? So we want to learn to start questioning our thoughts. So interpretations are theories about what is going on. We all need them. There's nothing wrong with having theories as long as we don't hold to them too tightly, so we can change them if we get more facts and as long as we are open to being wrong. And that can keep us humble too, which is a good thing. Okay, so again, it's not just what happens to us, it's how we interpret them that lead to our emotions. And actually, I want to go back to emotions for a minute before I talk about some ways to respond to emotions and say, we have emotions, like let's say we get angry about something or we get scared or sad about something. But then oftentimes we have secondary emotions, which means we have emotions about our emotions. Okay. Have you ever heard, like, I'm spiraling? Like maybe you started out getting scared and then you got angry and then you felt ashamed because maybe somebody shamed you and told you you're too sensitive, you shouldn't be scared, you shouldn't be angry, and you start spiraling into shame, and then you get into depression. And so any way that we can stop and come back to the present moment, we can stop that cycle, and we can also get curious about, what are we believing, what are we interpreting, is it true, is it kind, is it helpful, to try and stop that spiral, right? Okay, so there's a lot of effective ways to respond to emotions. I certainly don't have time to go over all of these today, but I want to mention some of them. Mindfulness. I've got a slide in a minute with my favorite definition of mindfulness, certainly in our culture increasingly, which is a good thing. There's mindful self compassion, which some of you took that class previously. And one type of mindful self compassion I really like is called RAIN. It's an acronym. We will be going over that. I've already been mentioning recognizing and correcting cognitive distortions. Um, and I'll mention another one, but there's a whole list that you can Google, common cognitive distortions. Because the trick is we all do them all, but we usually have our favorites, but we need to catch ourselves doing them and correct our thinking. We can change the channel on our thoughts. We can diffuse our thoughts, which means not believing them when they're not true, kind, or helpful, and observing our thoughts like, oh, I'm having the thought that I'm stupid, instead of just having the thought I'm stupid and immediately reacting to it. There's a whole, again, long list of emotion regulation skills from DBT, which are super helpful. And those are about preventing ourselves from getting too emotional by taking care of ourselves, basically. They're preventive, like eat right, get enough sleep, exercise, see friends, do things that feed our soul. And then there's distress tolerance skills, which are skills to do when we're already really upset. Self-soothe ourselves, calm ourselves, be kind to ourselves, distract ourselves, all those sorts of things. And then I've already mentioned that I really like nonviolent communication, which can help us get clear about our thoughts and feelings and then help us negotiate better with other people to try and get our needs met. And the more of our needs are met, the happier we tend to be. Okay. So, again, talking about thought distortions or cognitive distortions, we all have distorted thoughts sometimes, but the key is to catch ourselves. So, most people's favorite is catastrophizing. That means we're predicting the future and that it will be awful, terrible, a catastrophe. Now, it doesn't always have to be a huge catastrophe, but like we kind of rehearse in our mind, oh, I'm going to go to that dinner party and I'm going to be so uncomfortable. Or, oh, my boss is going to get mad at me. I'm going to lose my job. I mean, it could be all different kinds of levels of catastrophe, right? But how do you feel when you do that? Terrible, anxious, depressed? Are you 100% accurate psychic? If you're not, stop predicting the future. The truth is, we often don't know what will happen. And if you're going to make stuff up, you may as well predict it will work out. In the long term, things usually do. The antidote: stop believing every thought you have, everything you think, and notice and dispute the thought distortions. So I want to be clear. It doesn't mean we can't plan. It doesn't mean we can't try to anticipate options of what will happen. But our minds differentiate very little between a thought and an image we have and reality. So, for most of you, if I were to say, okay, imagine biting a lemon right now, most of us would pucker and salivate a little bit because we're already imagining it. We're already having an emotional, physical reaction to it. So, we're often borrowing trouble from the future and from the past instead of being in the present moment where most 95% of the time we're okay, right? Okay. Um, I also want to go back to a point that just occurred to me that I didn't mention earlier. And we were talking about repressing emotions. We want to know what we feel, and we want to be able to feel what we feel, analyze it, figure out if we need to act on it or just be kind to it or let it go. But I said if we repress it, it's going to hang around longer. And to Dr. Shama's point, if we don't have them, we're often like I was raised in a family where it was not okay for me to be angry. And there was one rageaholic in the family, and that was enough. So I developed TMJ because I would clench my jaw and literally almost bite my tongue, right? Like I was not able to say or even know or even feel that I was angry until I got older, in my 20s and got into therapy. So we can create pain and chronic illness if we don't have our emotions and if we're not able to know what our emotions are trying to tell us. Because sometimes they're telling us very helpful things like, I don't want to be treated that way. I need to tell somebody to stop, you know? Okay, another skill is changing the channel. So many of us, our default is to have an anxious attitude. Oh no, what if this happens? Living in what ifs, you can create a lot of anxiety, right? It will be awful, terrible, and I can't stand it. So that's catastrophizing. It leads to anxiety. It's in emotion mind. But you can say, oh, I'm going to change the channel. I'm going to turn to the calm, confident attitude. I'm okay right now. Look around. Am I safe? Yes. Is anybody attacking me? No. Now, if you're literally not safe, please get help from a domestic violence hotline. But most of us are safe most of the time, right? I'm okay right now. I'll be okay because you've survived everything that's ever happened to you. Even if things don't go the way I want, I can handle it and learn from it. It leads to a calm confidence and reasonable mind. And also to have positive, realistic, reassuring self talk, which that is an example of. Okay, let's talk about mindfulness. I talked about borrowing trouble from the past and the future. An antidote is to be in the present moment. So, mindfulness means paying attention on purpose to the present moment with an attitude of acceptance, curiosity, openness, and non judgment. Which doesn't mean you're not going to have judgments, but letting go of our judgments, letting go of our prejudices, letting go of believing we already know everything about a situation. Just be open and curious. Don't get so judgmental about good and bad and right and wrong. Just see what's actually going on. Be aware of the present moment because that's where all of life occurs. We don't want to get to the end of our day and have been so in our head and our thoughts all day long that we missed, eating our nice lunch or the sun shining or whatever. Be aware of what's happening now in external reality and be mindful of something. At different times, we can be mindful of different things, such as our senses, thoughts, feelings, movement, the breath, the body. One reason that mindful meditation usually starts with focusing on the breath is because it's highly portable. If you're alive, you're breathing. And you can always use it to anchor you back to the present moment, back to the body. Okay. So I want to describe the practice of rain, and then we're going to do it for a minute. Okay. So rain is a form of mindful acceptance, inquiry, and self-compassion. Been popularized by Tara Brach, who's a psychologist and a meditation instructor. Um, so, first, you recognize your emotion and you name it. And by the way, when you name an emotion, you activate a different part of the brain. So you get a little more distant from the emotion, which is good. And then you do something that we normally do not do. We allow it. We accept it. We don't fight it. We don't judge it. We don't tense against it. We try not to have a secondary reaction to it. The emotion is already here. We try and soften our body to it. We try to say yes to it. And then we inquire, where do we notice it in our body or mind? Where do we feel it in the body? Drop into the body and feel it in the body. Be with the sensations. And bring nurture the whole time. Bring kindness and self compassion. Treat yourself like you would a friend or a loved one. Then, after you do all of that, you can come back to, what am I believing about the situation that triggered it? Is that interpretation necessarily true? What am I needing? Or what could I say to myself that might be kind? So let's try it for a minute. So I want you to close your eyes. I want you to just get curious. What am I feeling right now? You might be feeling neutral. You might be feeling bored. You might be feeling tired. You might be sad, confused, scared, worried. Any of the emotions. A little bit frustrated. Um, just notice, what are you feeling? And just put a name to it. And then just let it be there. Even if you don't like the feeling, it's already here. So getting tense and judging and pushing it away only makes it worse. So I'm a little bit tired. I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm a little bit sad. I'm a lot sad. It's already here. Just let it be here. Just be gentle with it. Now feel it in the body. Where do you feel it in the body? And then try to drop your awareness out of your head and into that part of the body. You may or may not know how to do that, but part of you knows. So just try. Like, it's sort of like the difference between looking at your hand and feeling the inside of your hand. Okay? So just kind of feel that feeling and imagine you're sitting next to that part of you like it's a friend on a park bench or on a couch and you're just sitting there with kindness. I'm sorry. That's a little hard. I don't like that feeling. I'm sorry you're feeling that way, And bring that compassion to yourself. And then maybe get curious. Why am I feeling that way? Do I know? Or if I don't know, what am I believing about the situation? Am I blaming myself? Am I blaming somebody else? Did I have a loss that's making me sad? Am I catastrophizing? What's going on? And then is there just something kind that you could say to yourself, or is there something that part of you needs? Like, yes, I want to commit to giving myself a hot bath later tonight, or saying no to that person that I've been worrying about saying no to, or whatever it is. Yeah. So that was a very brief version of rain. You can also go on YouTube and look up Rain Meditation by Tara Brach. It's for a guided meditation that's longer on that. So open your eyes when you're ready. So this is a plug for nonviolent communication, which I keep mentioning. It's also known as compassionate communication. And again, you have a handout that gives you kind of a cheat sheet about how to do it. It's focusing on our thoughts, feelings, needs, and wants and requests, as well as other people's thoughts, feelings, needs, wants, and requests, because it's trying to communicate from the heart. It's trying to listen from the heart and get other people to have more empathy and understanding of us, help us have more empathy and understanding of others, help us negotiate and increase our chances of getting our needs met, and help us differentiate between facts, feelings, interpretations, needs, evaluations, requests, demands, and complaints, which is all really helpful in getting clear. And we don't have to use there's a particular format for how to communicate, but we don't have to say all that or do it in that exact format. It's just to help us get our thoughts and feelings more clear. And Marshall Rosenberg, who invented it, or he's a psychologist, a PhD psychologist, and I took trainings with him. He had this couple one time that had been married like I don't know, over 40 years. And they're like, we don't think, he said, I can guarantee you that when I can get two people to understand each other, I can solve any of their problems. They can solve any of their problems in like 15 to 20 minutes. And they're like, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't do that because we've had this same argument for 20 years. And when he really got them to very clearly explain what they were feeling, wanting, needing, thinking, worried about, they came up with a solution and it was amazing. So, okay. Now remember, change takes practice and often we need help, but you deserve it. And that's my plug for therapy, among other things. And there are a lot of effective types of therapy, and there's a whole alphabet soup of acronyms. Like every field, we like our acronyms. So there's ACT, CBT, DBT, EMDR, IFS, MBCT, MBS, RMSC. There's other ones. But all of these have been researched, proven to be helpful and effective. I'm not going to read all of this to you right now, but you have the handout, and I've pulled from most of these to do this training tonight. You and Dr. Shama, and if you have a therapist, you can talk to your therapist if you're using a type of therapy that's been shown to help the type of problem you have. Um, Again, there's a lot of them helpful for anxiety. There's ones helpful for pain, immune system, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of mindfulness-based therapies. And I will say for people with trauma, EMDR is one of my favorite, as well as internal family systems. But I like to I like to blend a lot of these different tools and techniques so that I have a lot of tools and techniques, and then my clients have a lot of tools and techniques for managing emotions, stress, life change, and the normal losses and griefs of life. Um, and I also want to say I really love the movie Inside Out. And internal family systems, just so you'll know, is kind of about how our wise mind, compassionate heart can lead us and help our inner little young ones, our little hurt parts, and our little adult parts that get too self critical and all that, come to a better relationship with each other and live our lives more effectively. So that's a cool movie if you haven't seen it. So it's time for questions. And I believe I did it in just under an hour. So, okay. So you can either raise your hand, or if you want, you could put something in the chat.
Thank you, Lisa.
I believe if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, you can unmute yourself. Don't be shy. Or maybe you could share if you think one of these would be really helpful for you, or if you've already used them before.
Yes, Lisa, I'll just add a couple of things. Um, you kind of mentioned about, how we need to feel the emotions and use the compassion, the self-compassion. Um, when we were at the neuroscience training, they kind of showed us that how emotions are residing on our primitive brain, and the
Yes.
neocortex is the newer brain that has developed the reasoning, the logic, and
Mm-hmm.
facts and all that stuff. So when you were referring back to the child and the adult, all of our emotions are like that 5-year-old child, and our reasoning is like the adult. So there is a little bit of that 5-year-old and the adult, which is the emotional brain, which is in the primitive brain and the neocortex. There's a little bit of that emotion which is like a 5-year-old and the adult. So it's important to let that 5-year-old express and hold that compassion or space for those emotions and then kind of guide it. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you know, we have the reptilian brain, we have the primate brain, we have the human brain. And when I said a different part of our brain is activated when we name our emotions, it gets into the prefrontal cortex, which is our human brain. So that we're literally shifting gears by even just stopping and asking ourselves questions. We're moving out of that primitive brain, but we don't want to dismiss the primitive brain because you know how we talk about gut sense and intuition? Our primitive brain in our gut and our whole body takes in way more information than our left brain can possibly name and understand, and often knows things. The right brain often knows things that we rationally don't know why we know or how we know, but we do know. If you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, he talks about, you'll get this sense like something's wrong, but I don't know what it is. But we also have to be careful that it's not our conditioned fears. So, yeah.
that is true. That is true. And I really like the idea of the fact and our interpretation, which leads to emotion. Um, just few months ago when I went out for a walk, I hadn't seen a friend for a long time. We were a bunch of people, and one of them, I was expecting her to be affectionate. Hey, long time no see, whatever. And she didn't do that. So I came home and I felt like, she really didn't care. She didn't miss me or whatever. And then I had to, for a second, pause and say, oh, I'm expecting that she should have returned to me and said, hey, how are you? Where were you? Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was my expectation or the interpretation. And I'm thinking,
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, if I didn't have that expectation, I would just be totally fine walking with her and saying hi. And
That's right.
yeah, so
That's right.
yes, it definitely just at least making ourselves aware, oh, it's my interpretation, can definitely
Mm-hmm.
loosen the grip on us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, that.
Yeah, like if you have a young part that tended to be insecure and be like, have a belief from childhood, people really don't like me, or something like that, for example, which I'm not saying you did, but many people do, then you can have kind of an insecure chip on your shoulder. We've heard of an angry chip on our shoulder. We have an insecure chip on our shoulder and be looking for the facts that support that theory, right? And sometimes we need to heal that part so that we don't do that. I like to tell my clients, we don't want rose colored glasses, but we don't want crap colored glasses either. We just want to see clearly what's going on. I see Erin has a question.
More of an observation just when I was studying rain with a meditation teacher, maybe it would help someone else. But I know she quoted someone, I wish I could remember the person, about you're not the story in your head. You're just the person who has to listen to it.
That's a
And so
great quote.
I was conditioned, like a lot of people, for it to always be the bad story. The story was
Mm-hmm.
always the bad story. And a lot of really bad stories have happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
But what Rain was helpful in teaching me is, what if just this once it's the good story?
Mm-hmm.
What if it's the good story? What if just this one time it's the good story? So sometimes when I get really, really twisted, I remember to ask myself, what if it's the good story? Maybe this time it's the good story. And like
Yeah, that's
most
like that's
candidates.
like that's like not catastrophizing too, right?
Mm. And I'm an expert at catastrophizing. So
Yeah. Well, most of us have quite a bit of experience, but especially if bad things have happened to us. Like I'm a trauma survivor from childhood, so I had to work really hard to get out of that bias. And we have that negativity bias as humans anyway, because it's more important to know where the den of snakes is even than where the food is, right? And Dr. Shama was talking about interpretations. Some of them happen just like that because they're very conditioned. You use that word, Aaron, right? And, you know, if we're walking on a path and we see a snake, we're going to get scared before we even consciously register it because that's so important to our survival. But as soon as we see it's either not venomous or it's actually a twig or something, we're going to calm down. So it's that reality checking function too. Yeah. Thank you so much, Erin. I love that quote. Anything else?
I guess we should be good. Thank you. Thank you for that excellent detailed explanation. We appreciate it, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you for participating, all of you. Diane, Erin, and
Thank you. It was great.
My
I got
pleasure.
lots of notes.
thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too. Bye bye.